All right, this is part 3 of An Immense Practical Advantage, Clarity in the Midst of Confusion. It's a little bit related to the idea of from out of chaos, order from out of chaos. It's the slogan of a particular group that maybe people are familiar with. Ordo, I'm forgetting the Latin. I don't remember the Latin term. Ordo ab chaos? I don't know if that's how it's said in Latin. Anyway, it's not a particularly new idea, order out of chaos. So, clarity in the midst of confusion, order, or recognition of order in the midst of other people perceiving chaos, or even experiencing chaos, because when I say perceive and experience, similar things. So my tradition is the best. There's this chaos of a variety of fanatics who may all say, my tradition is the best, my perspective is the best, my point of view is the best, my political ideology is the best, my interpretation of economic patterns is the best. Certainly, I have had that orientation. I believe that my interpretations of economic patterns are consistently accurate, and in my midst are lots and lots of people who keep being surprised at things I predicted years in advance of them happening, and I would say, okay, my models are accurate, they're working, they're consistent with what actually happens, and therefore, relative to others who are not consistent with what actually happens, mine is better, or even the best. And because I have assembled my models from a variety of studies, it's not just an inherited model that I'm a fanatic of. It's a model that I'm refining as I go. But many of the presumptions that I had from the beginning, as it relates to things like supply and demand, are still the same presumptions that I use effectively as time goes on. So my tradition is the best one. This is the universal fanaticism of all fanatics. Each religion is presented by fanatics as better than any of the others. Each branch of each religion is presented as the best branch of that religion, like within Christianity. Each denomination of each branch is presented as the best denomination. Christians agree with other Christians about Christianity. Catholics agree with other Catholics about Catholicism. Roman Catholics agree with other Roman Catholics over their preference or superiority over the Eastern Orthodox Catholic churches and other popes, such as the Coptic Pope. There's a picture of the Coptic Pope there in the blog. Looks a whole lot like the garb and appearance of what we would recognize as Santa Claus. A particular order of the Catholic Church, such as the Jesuits, they may agree with other Jesuits about how the Jesuits are the best order, they're better than the Dominicans, better than the Franciscans, better than the Benedictines. The Jesuits are best, according to the Jesuits. Even within a particular order of the Roman Catholic Church, or any denomination, any congregation, there may be disagreement, conflict, and schisms. Any office, any company, any political party, any congregation, any denomination, there could be some disagreement, some variety of perspectives and lack of uniformity, some disagreement, some difference of perspective, difference of opinion, difference of language, difference of preference, and those, in many cases, lead to interpersonal conflicts, sometimes separations. The Shiites separate from the Sunnis and become two separate branches of Islam. The Reform Jews and the Orthodox Jews separate. At some point in history, they separated, and there became a very distinct culture for each of those two groups. Distinct rules, distinct patterns of behavior, distinct patterns of language, patterns of perception, distinct subcultures. So that's just religious fanaticism. And the fanatical part, again, is when people are antagonistically insistent that their particular model or organization is the best, and that others are a threat to them. There's that perception of underlying distress and fear that someone might actually be wrong. And because of that fear of being wrong, they can be very critical and antagonistic towards other points of view. However, is that just the case for religious fanaticism? What about other forms of fanaticism? Nationalism. Our country is the best. Lots of countries emphasize certain qualities of their own country as extremely favorable. That's because there are different values in different countries. And our values in any particular country, people would generally say our values are the best, and therefore our country is the best because it fits those values. It's kind of like saying, I am a man, and I have all the qualities of a man, and therefore I am the best kind of gender or whatever. Somebody else says, I'm a woman, and I have all the qualities of a woman, and I value the values of a woman, and therefore I'm the best kind of gender there is because there's that value and quality congruence. I have a picture of some KKK members. They have a certain set of values and a certain set of preferences and beliefs. And within that organization, other members of that organization, the organization itself, is evaluated as the best, the closest to the values of that organization. A different group, the Anti-Defamation League or the Amnesty International. Within Amnesty International, there tends to be certain values, certain life experiences, certain belief systems. And everybody within that group that maintains involvement in that group will say, this group fits my values, this is the best group, any other group isn't as good as this one. Some of them are quite bad, this one's pretty darn good. In fact, it's the best. And that may be someone's belief and someone's statement if they are a fanatical supporter of a particular group. My tradition is the best one. If said with that frightened animosity in the background, that's fanaticism. Different political parties may all say the same thing about how their own favorite tradition is not just their personal favorite, but the best, inherently, intrinsically, and universally the best, right? Democrats all agree that the Democratic Party, at least as it's constantly, as it's currently constituted, that if they're members of it now, well, they have something in common, and they say we're all the best. We're the Democrats, and we're the best party. Republicans, they would say we are the best party. They all agree with each other that they're the best party. If there's a subgroup of the Republicans, the neocons, they would all agree with each other that the neocons are the best subcategory of Republicans. The libertarians, they all agree. All of us are the best ones. We're the best kind of party, and we're the best kind of people, and we're the libertarians. Communists, they all agree. We are the best political party. We're the best people. Our values are the right ones. It's the best one. Our party is the best. Nazis, they all agree. We're all the best because our values are the best, and the Nazi party fulfills on those values or promotes those values, and wow, political party we are, ours is the best. Or the fascists, they say, well, we're all in agreement about the best political party, which is the fascist party, and everybody in that party agrees it's the best one. Or maybe they don't, maybe they're not that sincere, but at least they say so when the opportunity comes to state their loyalty. If they're really frightened enough, they're going to be very, very quick to agree with the basic values of the culture. They're going to say, yes, the fascist party is the best one, the very best one. Here's why. They can list all these values that are typical of fascists. The Tories, they all agree. Or whatever political party, they all, within that party, the loyal fanaticists of that party all agree that that party is the best one. Just like the Shiites will all say that the Shiite part of the religion of Islam is the best one, and the Sufis will say, well, Sufism is the best one, and the Sikhs, the Sikhs, they'll say Sikhism is the best one, and Protestants, they'll say Protestantism is the best, and Baptists will say Baptists are the best, and Southern Baptists will say Southern Baptists are the best, right? So there's that consistency. Fanaticism is universal in academic psychology. Which tradition is the best or the most valid? Well, behaviorists all agree that behaviorism is the best, and Freudians all agree that Freudian psychology is the best, and transactional analysts all agree that transactional analysis is the best field of psychology. It could be in science, it could be in academia, it could be in medicine, it could be in religion, it could be in philosophy, it could be in political ideology, it could be in anything. Fanaticism means I'm afraid of other people's models of reality, and I'm going to insist that mine is the best, even if it involves arguing, violence, calling people idiots, all that kind of stuff. So, there are people who study a variety of models and appreciate them all without being fanatical about any one of them in particular. For instance, a map maker may appreciate different kinds of maps: road maps, elevation maps, and population maps. They show different, densities of population in different areas or something. Each map is designed to focus on specific information and exclude nearly all of the other information, so that there is an exclusive emphasis on the particular distinctions presented. If I want a map that shows me the different roads of an area, well, I've got to find a map of that area that shows roads, a road map of that area. That's it. So at some point somebody may recognize there's a bunch of different models, there's a bunch of different perspectives, and each of them have some value. What's the application? What's the priority? And what model or what map fits that priority? What perspective fits that priority? Politics is a realm of conflict and competition. That's inherent in politics. Politics is about policing. That's where the word politics comes from. Is related to the word police. It's also related to the word polis, P-O-L-I-S, which means city. And it's when there's a bunch of people densely gathered together. They want to have certain standards and norms and rules that they all can expect of each other. That's efficient. That works. Politics is a realm of coordination and collaboration and cooperation, but also of conflict and competition, as people sometimes are conflicting between groups or within a group, within a particular territory, within a particular jurisdiction, within a particular geographical region. There can be conflict and competition in regard to politics. This party against that party. This proposal against that proposal. One can take a map showing different geographic areas and different patterns of different patterns of political activity, such as voting results or party affiliations of the populations that are registered voters in that area. That map may be precisely accurate, at least briefly. A map may be accurate, it may be approximation, and it may be close enough to be useful, and it may be that within a year or a day, it no longer reflects reality. When people do polls, like telephone survey polls, they call up people and say, who would you vote for if the election was today? Who are you planning to vote for? And things like that. Well, those results change over time, right? And those surveys are approximations. They're not calling every single person. They're calling a certain number of people to have a pretty good idea of what is what's representative of the larger group. They want to have a small enough sample, a big enough sample that's representative to make some presumptions about a large group of people. Now they know that those are presumptions. They know they've only called 600 people, not 600,000, and they're taking the 600 and extrapolating some presumptions about the other 500 some thousand people, right? They're not worshiping the results of the poll. They recognize it's just a poll and it's just results. They're not worshiping the map. All maps are approximations. Some are designed for accuracy, most of them in fact, but others may be designed to mislead. That it is possible to create a map and distribute it to one or more recipients in order to specifically mislead them. Spies might do this on purpose. Words are a lot like maps. Some statements are designed for accuracy, in fact, most of them, or at least a whole lot of them, and other statements may be designed specifically to mislead or distract or confuse other people. Some statements, some models, some perspectives may be presented with specific intention to mislead. Santa Claus is going to come down this chimney right here at such and such time, and he is going to bring you some gifts. Why do people say things like that? Well, for fun might be one answer, to see if somebody can tell if they're kidding, if they're joking. To test somebody's intelligence and perceptiveness. To mislead, distract, and confuse. So, when we're taught how to label things, whether it's inflation or deflation or the best country or the enemy country that's unjust and corrupt and so on. Whenever we're taught to label something, we're generally taught to copy the models presented to us by authorities as the models that they actually use, as if they actually use them. So what if different people use slightly different words differently? Like, what if when Democrats say the best proposal, they mean something different than when Republicans say the best proposal? And when Democrats say the most just and equitable plan, they might mean something different than when Republicans use the exact same terminology, the most just and equitable plan. They don't necessarily mean any one thing when different groups of people use the same words. In fact, the same person could use a word over the course of time and mean it a little differently. This is normal. This is, like when I say that chair. Well, I could refer to different chairs by that chair, of course. So this is not inherently deceptive. This is just the reality of how language works. And language does provide for the potential of deception. So what if a ruling class modified a story slightly to fit some purpose of value to them, such as to influence the perception and behavior of others? Maybe they say, well, here's the reality of our system of government, or here's the reality of our religious tradition, or an institution, or here's the reality of the particular economic patterns that are going on right now. They can present certain interpretations, certain labelings as the right ones, even knowing that there may be some overgeneralization or even some inaccuracy in what they're presenting. There could be fraud. That's a possible thing. Now, the ruling class, or whoever it may be that's publicists, advertisers that are constructing certain stories and selecting certain information to emphasize and excluding some certain information, just like a map maker when making a map. Well, what if a true story was used as a model for another story, and they're going to take a shortened version of it or a modified version of it? Or what if they're going to start from scratch and just make up something? Those can all be useful. It doesn't mean they aren't useful. It means, in fact, when people are lying and deceiving, they're doing it for economic reasons. Consider that there was an actual pattern of behavior amongst a group of elders or priests or shamans in Northern Europe a long time ago, maybe even not all that long ago. And their actual behavior could be mapped or modeled using a story, a new story that leaves out many of the details of their actual behavior, simplifying the story into a very short version. So we've got this pattern of activity, pattern of behavior by these elders, these priests, these shamans. So we could shorten that story. We could make it a really, really short story, leave out most of it, the details, right? And new elements could be added to the story. Things that were similar to what's true, or things that were completely fabricated. They may be just fun. Maybe they're jokes that are really silly and it's a lot of fun. The story could be made into a myth. So, did people ever enter homes through chimneys in order to bring gifts to children? Apparently so. Stories indicate that people entered homes through chimneys in order to bring gifts to children. When so much snow fell that, this was in parts of northern Europe, when so much snow fell that people were trapped inside their homes during the winter and could not exit through their doors. They were blocked in, and the doors were blocked by several feet of snow. So the only way in or out was through the chimneys. And then other people might ride a sleigh pulled by reindeer along that snow that's all the way up to the chimney, and they could ride the snow right onto the chimney. Right onto the roof, is what I meant to say. So the snow could be piled so high that it piled up to the roofs of the houses. The people ride the sleigh along the snow. They ride right onto the top of the roof. And those sleighs could be pulled by reindeer. The people ride their sleigh right along the snow onto the roofs of the homes and then enter through the chimney of the fireplace, which would be the only way to get in because of all the snow blocking the doors and every other access. So they could leave gifts of mushrooms hanging in the stockings over the fireplace. Why? Hanging in the stockings? Well, because that's where the mushrooms would be dried by the heat of a fire. When the fireplace is going to be used in the future, there'll be some smoke and some heat and some warmth that'll help to dry out the mushrooms that are hanging there in the stockings. And where would they find these little egg-shaped mushrooms? Under pine trees. So that's the actual historical anthropology, true story, to the best of my knowledge. And then you have the versions and variations that are told to little kids as it relates to the Christmas story and the Easter egg hunt, where you go out and look for these little eggs on the ground, these little egg-shaped treats. The Easter egg hunt and the gifts under the Christmas tree are actually ritual representations of the same seasonal practices of certain Northern European cultures. The myths are not just for manipulating the behavior of children to get them to behave well. Do what I say to get better Christmas presents. There's no manipulating of behavior involved in the Easter egg hunt in the sense of trying to bribe kids to behave well. They just, here's some treats. We're going to put them out there for you. You go find them. They're hidden in little colorful eggshells or plastic eggs or whatever. Little chickens, little marshmallow chickens, whatever. There's some treats. Go find them. So that modern ritual is based on an older ritual of kids going out and helping to collect these little egg-shaped mushrooms. Now, with those mushrooms, the kids would collect them and bring them back for the family. They wouldn't be used all at once. They're just seasonally available at a certain time of year. You go out. It's springtime, expecting to be able to find some of these mushrooms. You go out, you find the little egg-shaped mushrooms. You pick them, put them in a basket, bring back the basket, and maybe you'll get one or two, maybe not. But that's just gathering some food. I'm not saying a lot about the type of mushroom and how they were prepared and how they were used and what the effects of that were, but somebody who's interested can check that out. The Easter egg hunt is a ritual representation of this ancient practice. The Christmas tree with the gifts underneath it and with the prizes or treats hanging in the stockings, those are modern ritual representations of ancient traditions. Did people use Christmas trees 600 years ago, or 1,500 years ago, or 2,500 years ago? I don't know. I don't know how long ago it would be that people would cut down a pine tree and bring it into their home. I'm not sure, but I'm aware that the use of pine trees inside like that would be pretty unusual in the traditional cultures where they would have a hut or whatever, wooden stone homes. That would not be a normal thing to cut down a tree and bring it inside. That's a modern variation. Sells a lot of trees, Christmas trees. You can have a whole industry right there selling Christmas trees. Just like you have a whole industry of selling little plastic eggs. It's not a really big industry except for right around Easter time, sell these little plastic eggs. So, advertisers, people who manufacture little plastic objects, whatever, maybe they created this stuff. Fine. Sell a lot of trees, pine trees, right around Christmas. Great. Big business for somebody. Nothing wrong with that, right? So oddly enough, if a fanatical child who believes in Santa Claus or whatever were to go to visit a village which still maintained the original pagan rituals in terms of really having reindeers pulling sleighs that pull up on top of roofs because the snow is stacked so high, the snow is piled up so high, packed so high, and then somebody gets out of the sleigh that has some goodies in there and goes down the chimney or drops them down the chimney, the package or whatever. That kind of actual pattern of behavior, well, a fanatical child might go to a village that still maintains those original practices, and the child might accuse the villagers of heresy, defiling the holy, sacred myth of Santa Claus, subverting Christianity, combining Christianity with some other weird foreign pagan thing. Well, that would be a little bit ironic because that whole ritual is completely not part of the biblical Christianity. Easter eggs are not part of Jewish tradition as far as I know. There's no Easter per se in Judaism. But lots of cultures will have some kind of seasonal rituals like Christmas and Halloween and Easter. Now, in the south of the equator cultures, the timing of through the year would still probably be in the dark of winter, the cold of winter, and then in springtime. The fact that it's December or March would not be important. That's kind of a oddity. Anyway, so these kids, there's these fanatical kids, and they go to a village that's doing the old original practices, and these kids go up to the elders of the village and harshly tug on the beards of the elders, saying, "You're not the real Santa Claus. I know the real Santa Claus, and you are definitely not him. I am going to kill you for impersonating our holy Savior, Santa Claus." And that is an example of religious fanaticism. Of course, I'm kind of making a joke of it. If you look in the blog, I have a lot of images of child soldiers. In modern times, we have a lot of very advanced and dangerous weaponry that's been distributed throughout the world, including to children, including trained soldiers that are even under the age of 10. Lots of weapons and lots of child soldiers. And lots of presumptions and antagonism out there. Lots of fanaticism. Fanaticism and antagonism go together. This basic distress that other people's ideas are a threat to mine. That is a unusual, distinctive thing, relatively normal. Pretty much everybody goes through it, right? But it is not essential. There is another possibility. It's a stage of development. Idealism, as in fanaticism, is a stage of intellectual development. It is not really very surprising that a child might attempt to assert that a particular version of the story of Santa Claus is the best version. It's not really very surprising that a child might attempt to assert that a particular tradition of religious practice is the best, because it's the one familiar to them, and therefore it's the best as far as they know, right? They know it best, and therefore they know it as the best one. They might not even know that there are any others. It's not really very surprising that a child might attempt to assert that a particular political ideology is the best. But adults do the same thing, and again, that's an indication of their stage of intellectual development. All of those things may be normal presumptions for a child to make. In fact, they would be, incredibly advanced for an infant, but for a child, you would expect them to take whatever's familiar to them and presume it's the best instance of whatever other options are available. First, one's own story is presumed to be the only one. One's own model is presumed to be the only one. One's own experience is presumed to be the only one. Then when other variations, other traditions, other modifications are recognized, well, the one most familiar is presumed to be the best. For that individual, it may be practically best to stick with a familiar model, just as it's practically best to use a familiar language rather than to pretend to be competent at which one is not competent. And it's also practically challenging to have to learn a new language. It's challenging to have to learn a new story. It's challenging to have to learn a new perspective, or can be. Learning can be challenging. It can be humbling. It can also be very practical. But if somebody is good at a particular model or a particular method and it works fine for them, then they're going to keep with that. And they're going to think of their way as the best way. Nevertheless, as time goes on, one may learn other languages or other methods that are not a replacement for one's native language, but as a new practical competency for functional value. It's not to replace. When you learn a new model or like a new guitar chord, it's not a replacement for the other guitar chords you know, even if it's a different form of the same kind of chord. They're just different fingerings of the same chord. If you're studying a different political ideology, you can study it from the perspective of looking for what's wrong about it, or you can study it from the perspective of how could it be valuable, how could it be useful. When studying another religious tradition, one can look for how it's not as good as not a good fit as one's own tradition to one's own values. That's normal that you'd be able to find different values within different cultures and different traditions. But one may learn of other religious traditions and other political ideologies with an openness to what's the possible value of those things. Like other ways of building a bridge. Fine, I got a way to build a bridge. It works good for me, but I'm interested in learning another method of building a bridge. Each method is a tool. Each map is a simplification designed for a particular purpose. Each pattern of using language provides a different subjective emphasis and experience. Here's an example. I was a naive idiot is distinct from I was surprised to find out that the map I was using was inaccurate. Now, both of those two statements could be used to describe the same instance. Both of those interpretations in language can reference the same historical development. I was a naive idiot is a totally valid labeling, and I was surprised to find out the map I was using was inaccurate. Language allows for a huge varieties of ways to emphasize certain patterns or map out certain aspects of what is possible. Language is a tool for organizing perception. Language is a tool for organizing behavior, including instructing others in what to pay attention to and how to respond to whatever they experience. Language is a model of perception and behavior. Language organizes perception and behavior. Outside of language, there's no such thing as confusion. Confusion is simply the activity of emphasizing a particular model of reality over the direct experience of reality. Emphasizing the model idolatrously and discarding direct experience, or condemning direct experience, or what's the word I'm looking for? Devaluing or undervaluing or dismissing direct experience. Confusion is a normal experience for anyone using language. There's occasionally going to be confusion, especially someone who's just learning a language that's new to them, unfamiliar. I have some pictures of some Chinese characters, some strange shapes for me. I can see that the top two are repeats of each other, but I don't know what sounds they correspond to or what meanings or anything. They're just some weird shapes to me. And misinterpretation requires a basic level of familiarity. I don't know enough about Chinese characters to misinterpret them. I wouldn't know if that's a fake character or a real Chinese character. I wouldn't know. Misinterpretation requires a basic level of familiarity. I have to be able to mistake one thing for another, to misinterpret one thing for another thing. One cannot misinterpret the spoken sounds of the Chinese language without being familiar with several Chinese words. I can't misinterpret music if I'm deaf. I have to be able to have some familiarity with it and some language and vocabulary to describe what's going on, and not fluency. If I have fluency, then I won't have misinterpretation and confusion, or not nearly as much. There are different levels of fluency, right? Mere ignorance is not enough to produce confusion. If I don't know Chinese, I won't be confused. I'll see some different shapes, and I'll go, well, those might be Chinese, they might not, I don't know. I'm ignorant of that. That might mean something, and it might not, I don't know. I'm ignorant of that. Somebody who doesn't know that there's such a thing as foreign languages and foreign alphabets would simply say, I don't know what those marks are. Did people make those? I don't know. There must be a limited familiarity, some degree of familiarity, in order to misinterpret something, such as Chinese. The more fluent someone is, the less often they'll be confused, and the more quickly they will recognize any instance of being confused. Someone who has no familiarity with Chinese cannot be confused by it. They will simply recognize that the sequence of sounds or characters has no meaningful pattern for them personally. They don't know how to interpret it, and they know they don't know how to interpret it. They wouldn't be confused. They wouldn't misinterpret it. However, they could attempt to repeat the sounds or copy the characters. They could mimic it. They could reproduce it. They could repeat the sounds or copy the characters, but that would be it. They wouldn't have any skill at interpreting it. I'd give an example of, well, what do these Chinese characters mean? What is that sentence? How is that similar to some other idea? How do you translate it into English? Well, somebody who doesn't know Chinese can't do that, and they would know they can't do that. They're ignorant. They would not make a mistake of thinking that they were right. They would know that they have no idea. So when an infant first begins to copy the sounds of a language, they're practicing the physiological activity of pronunciation, like they're going to go ooh and ga, 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 and make those G sounds and those ooh sounds and so on. They're like a parrot, which can make sounds, and the parrot can make the sounds of the following sequence of sounds, right? I am not a parrot. Someone could train a parrot to say, I am not a parrot. I am not a parrot. Someone could train a parrot to repeat those sounds. Repeating the sounds does not indicate comprehension. Copying the shapes of the letters doesn't mean I know how to spell a word, doesn't mean I recognize the word, doesn't mean I know how to pronounce it, doesn't mean I know what it means. It's just copying. And that repetition is, of course, an important part of many educational institutions. So a parrot can be taught to parrot sounds. I am not a parrot. Now, in spirituality, we're taught about this kind of idea. I quote Isaiah chapter 29. Some will cry out my name in vain. Actually, this is a paraphrase of it. Some will cry out my name in vain, praising the Lord God with their lips, but they know me not. They do not recognize my spirit in their heart. Here's what Isaiah 29:13 actually says in English. I don't know which translation it is. Click the link if you want to know. The Lord says, these people worship me with their mouths and honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They know me not. So, when someone first begins to learn about spirituality and words like heaven, they can repeat the word, they can pronounce the word, but how familiar, how fluent are they with it? Well, when they first begin to learn, they shift from being totally ignorant to being vulnerable to confusion. Rather than humbly recognize confusion as confusion, they may experience fanaticism, a distress, and an experience of threat. And my model is the only valid one. And they fanatically may defend a particular model as the only valid model. They may promote that model not through conversation, but through political violence. That is not unusual. That is typical of fanaticism. Humanity's been doing it a long time. Of course, it's entirely valid to promote a particular model through political violence, or to promote a particular model through conversation. It involves economic resources to create institutions of indoctrination and to advance those institutions against other competing institutions. Political violence, deception, propaganda, those all make sense. You want to, if a group wants to monopolize access to economic resources, wants to be better organized than other groups, that's a particularly, perfectly valid goal, right? Use political violence to promote a model. Why not? It's one way to do it. It may be the best way for a certain model. It may not be the most practical, most effective way for another model. There might be a better way to do it. Or there might be a mixture of methods that are best. Note that there's a vast difference between a fanatical confusion, that one's model or tradition is the only valid one, and the recognition that all models may be useful and all of them evolve over time. One can be most familiar with a particular model, but still benefit from other models. I want to back up and insert a comment here from Ecclesiastes, I believe chapter 3. There's a time for every activity under heaven. There's a time for war and a time for peace, a time for political violence and a time for making peace and amnesty and so on. There's a time for love and a time for hate. Those are the kind of contrasts that are in the first, I believe, 8 verses of Ecclesiastes chapter 3. There's a time for all things under heaven, a time to plant seeds and a time to harvest the yield from the field, the growth of the seeds. There's a time to teach and a time to learn. There's a time for confusion and a time for clarity. Or at least it's possible and normal to have the occasional experience of confusion. It's normal to occasionally be surprised, to occasionally be humbled, to occasionally experience curiosity, to occasionally experience antagonism and confusion. All of those things are normal. What does it mean to confuse? What is the meaning of confusion? To confuse one thing for another is to label it inaccurately. To misinterpret something is to confuse it for something else. To confuse is to misinterpret it and label it as something that it isn't. To humbly recognize confusion is adaptive and functional. I was surprised that other people did not act as I expected, and then I panicked, condemning them for behaving in conflict with my expectations. In my panic, I reflexively favored clinging to my familiar expectations over the opportunity to relate to those people, to get to know them and be familiar with their perspectives, which would require learning and time and attention, and I wasn't that interested. I didn't value it. It wasn't my priority. I was in a panic. I condemned them. I was confused. Until I wasn't. Until I relaxed and settled down and recognized patterns directly. I started to review as I went through life how I'm labeling things. What's the model I'm using to label things? What are the perspectives that I'm bringing? What am I being attentive to? When I am confused about being confused, I can call it being frustrated. However, isn't it impossible to be frustrated without first being confused? Frustration involves recognizing that something is not working, but not knowing what is not working. That's frustration. Frustration requires confusion. Resentment. Resentment involves blaming someone else for behaving in ways that did not conform to my expectations. If I simply prefer that someone else act in a certain way, but they do not, do I resent that? I might. It's only when I'm in a panic of confusion and frustration that I would blame someone for frustrating me, resenting them. Rage typically involves repeated instances of resentment and frustration. Rage is the natural result of a particular sequence of experience that requires a foundation of confusion. If the confusion is resolved and clarified, the rage may suddenly disappear. The frustration may suddenly disappear. The confusion disappears. Resentment disappears. Repentance happens. Rather than blaming and resenting, rather than being frustrated, I just recognize, oh, I was confused. Ooh, it's a little humbling maybe, or a lot humbling. But the rage is gone. The resentment is gone. The frustration is gone. I might be surprised, I might be disappointed, but I'm not frustrated anymore. Likewise, if a frustrating confusion is resolved and clarified, the frustration may suddenly disappear, just as rage would disappear if the underlying confusion is disappearing. Recognizing confusion involves recognizing ignorance, admitting ignorance, like if I recognize that I have an inaccurate map, an inaccurate model. But I may not even know if there is an accurate map available. I just know the one I've got isn't accurate. The one I have is not relevant. That's humbling, though. I recognize I've been naive. I've been ignorant. I didn't know it. Oh, I'm surprised. And not only am I surprised, but I've been presuming mistakenly. I've been making a mistake. I've mislabeled this map as an accurate map. I didn't even think to check, is it accurate? I just presumed it was. And then I found out by being surprised by my experience, oh, this map is not accurate. This model is not accurate. So that recognition of ignorance is the completion of confusion. Confusion's over once I recognize, oh, I'm ignorant. If there's no confusion present, then I would not invest my attention into blame or resenting. There's got to be that underlying distress and panic. I would not rage or be frustrated. I would not be cynical. I would be humbled and recognize my ignorance. I might be curious. Or I might be resigned, as in not knowing if there is any method that could be worthy of hope or optimism. I might still be gullible. I'm ignorant. It doesn't mean I'm wise. I'm just ignorant and I know it. I'm humble and I still could be gullible. I still could be naive. I might even be confusing mere optimism for actual functionality. I might be confusing positive thinking for relevant thinking, for wisdom. But when I know that some prior familiar model does not fit with my recent experience, I can quickly recognize that and study my experience to refine my model or create a new model. Confusion does not stop me. Confusion occasionally happens. Confusion doesn't frustrate me. I might experience frustration and confusion, but confusion itself does not frustrate me. I'm not afraid of confusion. I expect occasional confusion. I expect occasional surprises. Confusion humbles me. It interrupts me. It signals for me to reorient to my experience, rather than fanatically clinging to a particular model that happens to be familiar to me. The very best one, the inherently best one, the one that I'm going to attack other people for not sharing, that I'm going to promote to other people, and if they don't agree with me, I'm going to disown them and exclude them, criticize them. I assert that I clearly recognize what is happening in global economics in regard to a deflation of credit markets. Now, if you're not familiar with that term, fine, but I assert that I clearly recognize the patterns of what is happening in global economics. I accurately label what's going on, and that's why I've been so consistently able to have years advanced knowledge and commentary of what would happen when, the exact sequence of things, what the political reactions would be to the housing crisis and to stock market decline and so on. All of those things were possible because of an advanced expectation of those developments. And I already knew, well, how do people generally respond to them? What are previous cases? How did politicians respond in Japan in the 1990s when similar events happened there? But as to the events that I expected, by 2003, 2004, I was expecting certain events to develop in the U.S. and also Europe. And I had the model of what had just recently happened in Japan in the 90s. I just thought, well, my best guess is we're going to have something similar to what happened there. We have the beginning of the same pattern. I expect the middle and the end to be similar. Now, what's happened in Japan in the last 21, 22 years isn't exactly what's going to happen in any other case, any other place. What happens in the future in Japan isn't necessarily what's going to happen in the future in any other place. In Europe and Japan, they have very little importing of oil. In the U.S., we still have the number 3 production of oil worldwide, second only to Russia and number 1 Saudi Arabia. We have a lot of oil in the U.S. that's still being produced, and we have a lot of oil that hasn't been extracted and refined yet in the U.S. But over the course of time, conventional light sweet crude oil is in tremendous abundance apparently in the OPEC nations, the oil producing and exporting countries, and in some abundance in Russia and in the U.S., not so much abundance in Japan, Greece, Italy, some of those places. So I assert that I clearly recognize what's happening in global economics, why Phoenix and Las Vegas had such early declines in the real estate market, why they had such large declines, again, related to energy prices, fuel prices, and sprawling desert metros where it's very expensive to cool a home in the summer or even to cool a car in a long commute from a distant suburb. I assert that I understand economic propaganda, political propaganda. The misinterpretations that other people are making, I can quickly see where are the logical flaws, where are the misinterpretations, where are the inaccurate labels. Where would I label something different? And where have I been labeling it differently for years and years? And these other people who claim to be surprised and claim to be confused, they're doing different labeling than I'm doing. That's because they're confused and they're surprised, and I anticipated these things. Among others, who also anticipated them. So I'm clear about the interpretations presented in mainstream media and which ones are misinterpretations. I'm clear about the interpretations presented in mainstream education and which ones are misinterpreted. At least as I presume, as I understand, according to my fluency of interpreting patterns of economic behaviors and economic trends. Many other people have other models to interpret what's happening and to identify what is emerging and label what is emerging in global economics. All of those labelings are valid labelings. Some of them just are less relevant than others, less practical, less valuable, less consistent with actual economic data. So if we take a few pieces of economic data and make some presumption and say, oh, that fits the idea that there's inflation, and we don't look any further, then we can believe that inflation is what's been happening, when in fact something else might be happening. There might be less and less borrowing, less and less enthusiasm about issuing credit, lending. That's deflation, credit deflation. It's not currency deflation. There's really no such thing as currency deflation. It's kind of a silly saying, like the color 7. There is no color 7. There is no currency deflation. There's credit deflation, though. And credit deflation is what's been going on. Anyway, again, the details of economics aren't of great interest in this presentation. We're talking about models of correctly interpreting things, correctly labeling things, and recognizing confusion when confusion is present. My models, given that there are several mutually consistent models or perspectives, I'm calling it my models. I've kind of refined a few different ones and put them together. Well, they've been consistently accurate. The naive may not know that they are naive. People who have presumptions may not know that they have presumptions. I knew I had certain presumptions. I was watching to see where are they supported, where are they violated. Where do I need to refine the model as I go? And it turns out that basically all the presumptions that I've had since 2004 at least, I've maintained. 2004 is when I added the issue of global fuel prices as a trigger for changes in other spending and borrowing behavior. In 2003, I anticipated many of the effects. I saw them starting, but I didn't know what was causing them. And I could be wrong. But reality has been consistent with my forecast for many years. So the naive may not know that they're naive. The presumptive may not know they're presuming. The ignorant may not know that they are ignorant. But they may. And also, people who are ignorant might not know that there are relevant and reliable models of interpretation, of forecasting, of labeling. The arrogant may only know that they are frustrated and panicking and afraid. But they don't know that they're confused and arrogant about their preference for a familiar model over present evidence, over the actual data, whether it's economics or anything else. They may be terrified and thus blaming others, politicians, investors somewhere else, whoever. They're going to blame the Arabs, or they're going to blame the Europeans, or they're going to blame the Canadians, or they're going to blame whatever group of people. They're going to blame somebody because they're terrified. They blame others in an exploration of who can assist them in resolving their raging distress. They're going to attempt to see who can, with dignity, respond to their distress and their rage and their blame and their resentment and their panic. Of course, only those with clear perception of what is changing can identify the realistic opportunity within it, as well as how to appreciate or evaluate the various alternatives. When a model stops corresponding with direct experience of reality, there is a simple way to end the experience of conflict. Simply release the inaccurate model. Further, one can declare the presence of the experience of confusion. Curiosity and learning naturally emerge, leading to clarity, prudent action, and prosperity. And then in closing, I copy the New Testament variations of Jesus, quoting Isaiah in Mark 7:6. Jesus says, Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites. As it is written, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are but rules taught by men. They don't have the authority of divinity. They don't have the clarity of language, of intelligence. They're not at that developmental stage. They're in a distress, in a panic, arrogant, innocent, totally normal, totally valid, totally understandable, but not very useful. This has been the immense practical advantage of clarity in the midst of confusion.